differentiate between the following: diffusion and osmosis. So let us learn the differences between diffusion and osmosis. So the word diffusion represents, it is the movement of molecules from the region where it is present more to the region where it is present less. So the movement of molecules from its higher concentration to lower concentration. So this movement is called diffusion. So diffusion can be of particles, ions, molecules, or anything. It can be solid, liquid, or gases. It diffuses from the region where it is present more to the region where it is present less. So here in the example we can see there are molecules outside the cell which is present in more in number. Now this just diffuses into the cell where it is present less in number. So this movement is called diffusion, and for this movement there is no requirement of any membrane. So there is no barrier required. So it just diffuses from the region of higher concentration to the region of lower concentration. Whereas osmosis, when we consider osmosis, it is diffusion of water molecules. It means water moves from its higher concentration to lower concentration. And for this movement, there is a requirement of a semi-permeable membrane. So water moves from higher region to lower region. So here there is fresh water. That means it's a pure water. There is no dissolved solute. But here there is a salt water in which salt and water both is present. So when we compare these two solutions, water here it is more and here it is less. So water diffuses from fresh water to salt water. And for this diffusion, there is a requirement of semi-permeable membrane. So always osmosis refers to the movement of water, that is diffusion of water and through a semi-permeable membrane. For this movement, it is always requires a liquid medium and it requires a semi-permeable membrane. So diffusion, any solid, liquid, gases can move from higher region to lower region. In osmosis, only solvents such as water can move from higher region to lower region. And in diffusion, there is no requirement of semi-permeable membrane, and in osmosis, there is a requirement of semi-permeable membrane. Now, the second part of the fifth question, differentiate between transpiration and evaporation. Let's learn the differences between the process in transpiration and evaporation. Transpiration, it is a process in which the water which is absorbed by the plants will be lost in the form of vapor. So water is lost, the roots absorb water which is in the liquid form, and this water will be lost by the leaf in the form of vapor. So this process is called transpiration, and generally it occurs only in the plants. So here for transpiration to take place, a living system is involved. So a physical change is taking place, that is from liquid to gaseous, and a living system is involved. So we call this process as physiological process. And generally in the plants, transpiration occurs from the surface of the leaf, and in some cases it occurs through the lenticels present on the stem. So but majority it occurs through the surface of the leaf. So we can say transpiration mainly occurs through the stomatal pores present on the leaves. So on the surface of the leaves we can see present of minute pores which is called as stomata. And this transpiration is controlled by environmental factors such as temperature, moisture, humidity, and it is also controlled by the physiological factors of plants such as root to shoot ratio, number of stomata. If the stomata is more, the rate of transpiration will be more. But whereas the other part, when we talk about evaporation, it is nothing but conversion of liquid water into gaseous form. So this does not require a living system. It can occur from any free surface. So free surface can be a living or a non-living. So when we keep water in a bowl and heat it, the water gets vaporized, right? So this does not require a living system. So it can occur both on living as well as non-living surface. So it is just a physiological process. That is, water from liquid state, it converts into gaseous form. So here a living system is not involved. So we do not consider this as physiological process. It is only a physical change. And from any free surface, evaporation can take place. So here, from the soil, evaporation is taking place. When water present on the sea, when there is temperature more, the water gets evaporated. So only environmental factors are influencing evaporation. It can be the heat or the temperature. So these are the differences between transpiration and evaporation. So transpiration occurs in plants. It is a physiological process. It takes place through stomata, and both environmental and physiological factors affects transpiration. Whereas in evaporation, it is just a physical process. It can take place from a living or a non-living surface, and only environmental factors drive evaporation. Now coming to the next part, difference between osmotic pressure and osmotic potential. So earlier we learnt water potential. It is the measure of potential energy present in the water. And we learned that water potential is highest in case of pure water. So when we add solute, the water potential reduces. So keeping this in mind, let us learn the difference between osmotic pressure and osmotic potential. Now here, osmotic pressure, when we add solutes to the water, that is to the solution, the solute combines with the water and it forms a solution. So the movement of these solutes creates a pressure, it develops a pressure in the system, and this allows the water molecules into the system, and this induces the entry of water. So this pressure is called osmotic pressure. So osmotic pressure always induces water to enter inside the system. So it is a pressure developed by the solute present in the solution, and it is always a positive pressure because it allows water to enter the system and it is expressed in a positive sign. But when solute is added to a solution, to a pure water, it reduces its free energy and hence the water potential decreases. So osmotic potential reduces the free energy and hence the water potential decreases. We know that the highest water potential is 0, but when solutes are added, the water potential decreases, and this is called a negative pressure, and it is indicated by a negative sign. So in a less diluted solution, the water potential will be less negative. In concentrated solution, the water potential will be even more negative. So the values of osmotic pressure and osmotic potential will be same, but they are indicated by two different signs. Osmotic pressure is indicated by positive sign and osmotic potential is indicated by negative sign. So these are the difference between osmotic pressure and osmotic potential. Osmotic pressure, it is developed by the solute present in a solution, and the movement of solute creates a pressure. This induces the entry of water into the system. And in osmotic potential, the same solute which is added to a solution reduces its water potential, and hence its value will be negative, and the value of osmotic pressure will be represented by a positive sign. So let's learn the next difference between imbibition and diffusion. So we learned diffusion earlier. So diffusion means it is a movement of molecules from its higher concentration to lower concentration. So if the molecule is more outside, it diffuses inside. Like for example here, the oxygen concentration is more outside, so it enters inside the leaf. And in the leaf, if carbon dioxide concentration is more, it diffuses outside. So for this, there is no requirement of the particles, ions, molecules, anything. It can be solid, liquid or gas. They diffuse from the higher region to lower region. So this is about diffusion. Whereas imbibition, it is a special type of diffusion in which the non-living substances absorbs water. So it can absorb water and increases in its volume. For example, let us consider these seeds. So germinating seeds, when these seeds are soaked inside the water loving substances, hydrophilic substances present on the surface of the seed coat, it absorbs the water by the process called imbibition and increase in its size. So here we can see the size of the seeds have been increased. Its volume has been increased. So it usually involves only water and it is absorbed by the solid substances. So here there is no requirement of a living substance. So any solid substance, any water loving substance can absorb the water from the surface. So this process is called as imbibition. So imbibition is a special type of diffusion in which a solid or a non-living substance can absorb water and increase its volume. Whereas in diffusion, it can be solid, liquid or gas. These substances move from its higher concentration to lower concentration. The next difference, differentiate between apoplast and symplast pathway. This is the movement of water in plants. So here, this structure is the part of a root. So this is the transverse section of root, and when we zoom out a part of a root, we can see it has got three different layers. So the outer part is called epidermis, the inner part is called cortex, and this is the endodermis. Now from the epidermis, a single hair-like structure is extended, which we call it as root hairs. So root hairs are present to increase the surface area for water absorption. Now the water enters through the root hair, it reaches the epidermis, then cortex, and then it enters into the endodermis. So this is the pathway for water to reach the endodermis. Once it reaches the endodermis, it enters into the xylem vessels. From here it is transported to stem. And during this pathway, water takes two different routes. One, it includes a living system. So here we can see the water enters into the cytoplasm, and from one cell it enters into the next, and finally it reaches to the endodermis. So here water is moving from a living system, and we know that the cells are connected by plasmodesmata. So such pathway is called as symplastic route, in which water moves from one cell to another. In an alternative route, the water moves from one cell to another without entering into the living system. So here there is a fine space, that is between a cell wall and the plasma membrane. So through this space it reaches one cell to another. So from cell wall, the gap present in the cell wall, from this the water moves from one cell to another without entering into a living system, and this is called apoplastic route. So in apoplastic pathway, the movement of water through adjacent cell walls of epidermis, cortex, and then Casparian strips of endodermis. So water moves between the gap and it does not enter into the living system, that is the cytoplasm. Whereas in symplastic pathway, the movement of water through root hair, endodermis, cortex takes place by protoplasts, that is the cytoplasm, and each cells are interconnected by plasmodesmata. Now this is faster process because it does not move from one cell to another, so it is just moving between the space. Now this process is slower process because here osmosis has to take place. So in apoplastic pathway, water is moving between adjacent cell walls. In symplastic pathway, water is moving through the protoplast. Now the last part, that is difference between guttation and transpiration. Now let's learn what are the difference between guttation and transpiration. So we know that plants absorb water from the roots and this water is transported to the stem. So now plants absorb water throughout the day, and from this 90% of the water is lost, and this water is lost in the form of transpiration. So the water which is lost in the form of water vapor through stomata is called transpiration. So it is lost from the leaves in the form of water vapor. and this generally occurs through the site called stomata. And for transpiration to take place, there is a requirement of sunlight. So sunlight creates a suction pressure, and this suction pressure leads to transpiration. So generally transpiration occurs during the day, and transpiration can be controlled. When the stomata is open, transpiration takes place. When the stomata is closed, transpiration does not occur. So it is a controlled process. So when water is present, more transpiration takes place sufficiently. But when water is present in lesser quantity, plants undergo certain adaptation to conserve water. So transpiration process can be controlled. But guttation, it is another process in which water is lost in the form of liquid droplets. So in transpiration, water is lost in the form of vapor, whereas in guttation, water is lost in the form of liquid droplets. So here we can see fine drops of water in the endings. These are the veins and these are the vein endings. So through the vein endings, water is lost in the form of liquid droplets. So this process is called guttation. When transpiration is not taking place, more amount of water will be present in the vessels. Now the plant has to get rid of this water, and this water will be lost in the form of liquid droplets. So generally guttation occurs during the night time. So guttation is occurring only when in the absence of transpiration. So transpiration occurs during the daytime, whereas guttation occurs during the night time. Now the excess water which is absorbed by the roots has to be transported, and that will be removed in the form of guttation. Now these vein endings are permanently open. So since it is always open, the process of guttation is uncontrolled. It cannot be controlled. And usually guttation occurs through the vein endings. So at the end of the leaf or at the tip, we can see fine droplets. So this kind of scenario we can see early in the morning. So early in the morning, a small dew will be present at the end of the leaf. So these are nothing but water is lost in the form of liquid droplets. Now this process we call guttation. So in transpiration, water is lost in the form of vapor. In guttation, water is lost in the form of liquid droplets. Transpiration occurs through stomata. Guttation occurs through the vein endings in the leaves. Transpiration is a controlled process. In guttation, since these veins are open always, it is an uncontrolled process. So transpiration, sunlight is required, so it occurs during the daytime. For guttation, generally guttation occurs in the absence of transpiration, so we find it during the night. So these are the differences between guttation and transpiration.